ages of Rainbow Center on the theme Women at Work, Status Quo and Way Forward. Another generation of women will have to wait for gender parity, according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2021. As the impact of COVID-19 pandemic continues to be felt, closing the global gender gap has increased by a generation from 99.5 years to 135.6 years. Source is, of course, Global Gender Gap Report 2021 of World Economic Forum, which was published on 30th March 2021. The preliminary evidence suggests that the health emergency and the related economic downturn have impacted women more severely than men, partially reopening the gaps that had already been closed. Now, while I was exploring the infographics of the World Economic Forum report, some of the highlights that caught my attention includes the gender gaps in income persists and are underpinned by more women in low-paid jobs and more men in high-paid jobs. Then many emerging jobs are already deeply unequal. Then women's hiring into senior management positions reverses the backwards in year 2020. And yes, the parents' experiences of the pandemic are marked by more anxiety and lower productivity, especially women. With this background, we are happy to host today's panel discussion with the most apt and esteemed panel, and I'm really glad to welcome them. Dr. Major Rupinder Kaur, a leadership coach, an inclusion proponent, and a military veteran. Ms. Kanak Sharma, diversity and inclusion engagement partner at IBM. Ms. Bhavna Batra, director, global talent and India region talent lead at IHS Market. And Dr. Himanshi Tiwari, faculty of OB and HRM and diversity and inclusion and head Rainbow Center at BIMTech. I'm also very happy to welcome our audience who are from different walks of life. And I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Himanshi Tiwari for giving the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Rupali. I welcome my esteemed panelists, Dr. Rupinder, Ms. Bhavna Batra, and Ms. Kanak Suri. Along with us, I'm blessed to have the senior authorities of the Institute. We are having our director, Dr. Harivansh Chaturvedi, and Dr. Anupam Verma, sir, and other senior faculty member here as attendees for this panel talk. And it's a real honor for us to have the senior leadership of the Institute to listen to what we are here to and the message that we want to give. So I welcome all my panelists, and actually my task is quite easy today because I don't have to introduce anything that is not existing, but yes, it's very subtly affecting us. And the panel that I'm blessed to have today is a panel which is very dedicatedly working in this area, and they all understand that participation of women in the workforce is actually not an economic issue only. In fact, economics of women participation comes quite later, because economics happens only when participation happens and when the entry gate is open. So it's actually a major larger social and there are ethical questions that exist, and these questions demand a multidisciplinary investigation, and they demand a transformation in the mindsets and approaches, how we look at women participation, how we look at women at work, and what is the current status quo and how are we going to move forward, which is the theme of today's panel. And it's also important because when we craft policies for women, or when we craft policies for gender equality or diversity and inclusion, we are not crafting these things, or we are not putting this point forward because we want to put someone inferior superior to someone. That's not the case. We don't want to move into a world where a day men at work kind of panel is is a cause becomes a matter for discussion. We are in the pursuit of a general neutral world at some point of time, but that will happen only when the equality will exist first, and then only this colonial mindset of dividing gender and thinking it in terms of division of labor will happen. So I actually welcome Dr. Rupinder Kaur, Ms. Bhavna Batra, and Kanik Suri ji to kindly take this point forward. And this is something which I would say a blessing to me, that we four of us, we have there has been zero effort to match the frequency, because there is a chord which is common, and that chord is the diversity and equality and diversity and gender issues. So we all, as a panelist, as a team, I would say, we are putting forward this particular theme forward, and are moving, will leave it to on our audience, that how effectively we four have been able to meet the objectives and put our point forward. So with these words, I think I would request Rupali to kindly take forward the proceedings of the panel talk. Welcome to all my panelists.
Well, thank you so much, ma'am. I think there's some problem with my camera, so I'm sorry. Excuse me for this.
No problem.
And I'm getting it done.
We can hear you, Rupali. Not a problem.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. So, thank you for this opening remarks, Himanshi ma'am. And I take this opportunity to introduce the panelists one by one. Dr. Major Rupinder Kaur, a leadership coach, an inclusion proponent, and a military veteran, is an avid researcher and believes in evidence-based practice, has coached more than 150 senior leaders across two big four consulting firms, EY and Accenture. Her domain expertise is building, aligning, integrating, and sustaining leadership development initiatives at scale. She has deep expertise in building a learning culture through stakeholder buy in, designing and managing systematic change initiatives, using the power of coaching to lead behavioral change in young leaders. Formerly, she led leadership development interventions for EY India, where she was responsible for designing leader learning pathways, building leadership pipelines through carefully designed learning initiatives, and strengthening the culture of coaching. Combining the strengths of military leadership and her own research work in gender identity, Ms. Kaur has crafted and deployed Women in Leadership program, which has been successfully rolled out to 100 women directors till date and seen a 30% rise in being promoted as partners. Rupinder is an international speaker, having spoken at DevLearn Las Vegas, Delhi School of Economics, CII, and a panelist for FICCI discussions on gender policy. She is also an active member of UNSDG 5 and Lenin Gurgaon, spearheading the women agenda. She's an avid writer and her own blog in TOI named Agami, focused on developing future leaders. She holds global certifications in coaching, emotional intelligence, ATD master facilitation, design thinking, storytelling, and humor behavior assessments, including DISC, TRECOM, Social Styles, Harrison. We welcome you to BIMTech, ma'am.
Thank you, Rupali.
Welcome, Kanak. Welcome, Rupinder. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you so much. And then now I take this opportunity to introduce Ms. Kanak Suri, Diversity and Inclusion Engagement Partner at IBM. She leads gender diversity and parenting support programs at IBM India. Her role involves interventions towards arresting attrition of women at mid-level, enablement programs, and ensuring gender balance at senior roles. We welcome you, Ms. Suri, to this panel discussion.
Thank you, Rupali.
Welcome, ma'am. Ms. Bhavna Batra, Director Global Talent and India Region Talent Lead at IHS Market, has over the last 17 years worn multiple hats and had the privilege of influencing different facets of the corporate world. As a seasoned HR leader and P&L leader, she is passionate about partnering with the business to conceptualize and drive transformation, talent led, structure led, process led, and culture led. She has partnered with CXOs and promoters of medium large businesses globally as an advisor, facilitator, and coach to enable business readiness for the future while delivering on the table stakes for today. An empathetic and dynamic professional, Bhavna believes in balancing a long term big picture view with deep relationships, emotional intelligence, and heart with a practical result oriented approach to achieve business impact. Her leadership philosophy is anchored on Charles Darwin's famous words: it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one most adaptable to change. This belief, coupled with her love for travel and photography, helps her learn continuously and proactively adapt her lens to flow with evolving business realities. We welcome you to BIMTech, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Himanshi Tiwari, Faculty of OB and HRM and Diversity and Inclusion at BIMTech, is the head of Rainbow Center at BIMTech, co-founded by Erasmus Plus program of European Union. The center is specifically installed for women career counseling and guidance. In a career span of more than 18 years, Professor Himanshi Tiwari has worked as consultant in social sector and handled monitoring and evaluation programs for World Bank, Oxfam and Care India. She was also member of the team which prepared training modules for CAPART and JFM project for the Forest Department of Lucknow. She has been a visiting faculty with the University of Lucknow for teaching courses in MHRM and IR, Department of Social Work. She has been resource person for executive training programs for organizations like NTPC, IFCO, NBCC, UCO Bank, Power Grid, Hindustan Times, and BFIN Nepal, etc. She is principal investigator and India coordinator of a multi-country project which aims at SDG 5 and is committed towards the cause of women empowerment and gender equality named Project Rainbow, funded by European Union's Erasmus Plus program. She has keen interest in Hindi literature, debating, politics, music and mythology. Sahitya and Adhyatma are the two words that define her. Communication is her life wire. Addressing and kindling young minds for positivity is her driving force to be in teaching profession. Understanding and applying the intercommunication communion of science and spirituality to solve existential problems of youth and women is her long-term mission. We welcome you to this panel discussion, ma'am.
Thank you, Rupali. Thank you so much.
Welcome to all of you once again. And now let us hear out our panelists one by one. So I request Dr. Rupinder Kaur to kindly speak her viewpoints on the theme of today. Over to you, Rupinder.
Thank you so much, Rupali, for such a elaborate, introduction. I'm not sure if I can live up to those, lovely words that you spoke about me. And thank you so much, Professor Himanshi, for inviting us to this panel and giving us an opportunity to share our point of view. I would like to begin by saying that, every woman who's a part of this discussion today or has any time stood up for herself is a role model. Yeah. As much as we have this boxed definition of what a role model is and what isn't, if you have the courage and the conviction to stand up for what you think is right, and can hold your ground, I think you are a role model. So with that thought in process, let me share a couple of stories maybe from my life, which will also help convey to the audience what my point of view about corporate life and work life per se, and the issues of equity and equality are all about. So I come from a family where my grandma was working. And one of the things that my father, or one of the conditions that my father laid 20 years back for me to get married, was that I have to be standing on my own 2 feet, which means that I have to be economically independent before he marries me off to someone. Now, at that point in time, probably I didn't realize it, but I do realize it many years later, that having a sense of economic independence adds a very different level of not only your own conviction of that you are self-dependent, but also your status in the family and the the way the society treats you. Now, you did mention about the fact that these narratives about equality are generations of years old, and which is why you and I, or many women, or even men as allies, and I see some of them are there in the discussion also today, may not just serve the purpose, for the simple reason that the biases, the narratives, and the stories we tell our children are ingrained many years before we even enter the workforce. I'll give you a quick story here from my own life again. I have a son who's 13 years old and a daughter who's 8 years old. And my son was, because he's the elder one, when he was born, and I being the feminist, if I can call myself so, so when I was buying toys for him, I went ahead, and apart from all the cars and the aeroplanes and the guns, I went ahead and bought him, a kitchen set and dolls and all of that to keep the balance alive in his life. Now, but interestingly, despite my coaxing, asking and observing him, he never played with the kitchen set. He never played with the dolls. And when I sat down probing, I realized this peer group, the social narrative, the school that he's going to, tells him that these are not toys that boys play with, right? These are girly toys. What do you do with that? So I'm just giving you one fine example of, how do narratives play up later in life. And when the same boys, actually enter the workforce, and we talk about equality, and now we're talking about women in COVID actually fearing the brunt of, whether it's layoff, whether it's household work, whether it's work-life balance. It would have taken a lot of effort on the husband's or the boys' part to really say, I want to equally contribute to childcare. And probably Kanak can add more on that from her real life experience. Or I really want to go into the kitchen because, now my wife is also working from home. And, these are these practical realities. Otherwise, it was never thought of. So I think that's a power of social narrative and how it gets ingrained into the fabric of workforce when we enter and join the workforce. Now, adding to that is something what I call the second generation bias. Biases we all know, right? Gender stereotypes, women doing this role, man doing this role, women should conform to this, man should conform to this. But interestingly, the second generation bias, as per my research, refers to practices that actually may appear neutral or non-sexist, in that they apply to everyone, but which discriminate against a gender because they reflect the values of the gender who created or developed the setting, which is usually a workplace. To give you an example, leaders by definition, and because a lot of work I've done is around leadership, are expected to be assertive. So when women who act in a more collaborative fashion do not come across as assertive, when they start acting assertive, the perception in the system is that they are aggressive. So they do not fit the mold of the definition of leadership. So these are very interesting paradigms here when we look at some of those aspects of gender parity, equity, and equality. Interestingly, I can also share another anecdote which happened a few weeks back. I was a part of another panel of a prestigious forum, and after all the discussion, there was one gentleman who stood up and said, I think there's a lot of hype about women empowerment. The whole issue is very hyped up. It doesn't really need all that much attention. And if you just take a step back to what Rupali mentioned, it'll take a whole generation to even bring that parity that we're talking about. And a few years back, World Economic Forum with EY, which was my erstwhile firm, did a huge research study on 1,000 stakeholders, and they said that they figured out that it'll take 108 years to close the pay parity between men and women. So if those are not statistics which talk about the inequality, then what is? I'm going to leave everyone with broad 2 or 3 thoughts on what is the way forward as per my understanding. Given the fact that this narrative or this issue is holistic in nature, has multi-dimensional elements, quite a lot of moving parts, and multiple areas that where we can intervene. First and foremost thing I think that we can take is with ourselves. There's a lot which is being talked about, which is called the imposter syndrome, which is like, am I really good enough? And women have the tendency of saying and seeing themselves not in the best light of things. So I think first thought that I want to leave everyone as a woman who's a part of this panel and as men who want to encourage the women in their lives is believe in yourself, because that's the starting point. The second point, again, coming from a social narrative, is that let's build inclusion not only in workforces, which is of course the way to go, but start with the principles of inclusion at home. Teach your little boys what it means to be, an equal partner, and not really what does it mean to be a boy and what does it mean to be a girl. So break those shackles of, equity right at home. The third, which I think is very, very critical, and that's coming from experience. Sometimes what happens is when women grow to senior leadership positions, which is anyways very minuscule, which is 3% of the global CEO level that we talk about, and of course it keeps dwindling down. When women reach leadership positions, I think it's their sole responsibility to lift up, which is that how many women can you really encourage to be a part and support and actively sponsor to take up those leadership positions. I was in a very engaging conversation with Dr. Florida Starks last evening. She is the Senior Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Pearson. And the message that she gives is that I think it's our moral responsibility who've been fortunate enough to make it to the top level to at least give as much back to our community and women to get that parity in place, if at all, in the coming times. So I think I'm just going to take a pause here and, give it back to you, Professor Himanshi.
Thank you, Rupinder. Thank you so much for just giving a very apt beginning to the whole thought process, what we are going to now elaborate upon further. And I would request Rupali to kindly invite Kanakji for her viewpoints, and then we will move forward.
Sure. Thank you so much. It was great listening to you, Dr. Rupinder. And we move ahead with the second panelist. So I'll invite Ms. Kanak Sharma to please take it forward from here.
Thank you, Rupali, and thank you, Dr. Rupinder. It is beautiful listening to you. And I would say I would echo a lot of points that you mentioned out there. So hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be in this discussion with such esteemed leaders and on a topic which is not only extremely important for the organization as a whole, but it is also important for a larger society, right? And I am extremely proud to say that IBM has over 100 years of legacy of diversity and inclusion, and this is since like 1899 when we hired our first women. Till date, we've come a long way. And D&I is a business imperative for us. It's ingrained in our DNA, right? So when we actually talk about diversity, inclusion, equity at workplace, I think there are three very, very important pillars to it. The first pillar is the leadership accountability. That is, everything should flow from the top, and that is how it will be ingrained in your organization, right? That is how it will be implemented at the ground level. So that therefore it is very important that you have a right mix of all genders at the top, at the positions which really matter, at the positions which are there for decision making. And that is when we will have all our policies, processes, the vision, which will be holistic in nature, which will include everybody. So that is very important. And as Dr. Rupender and Rupali also mentioned that, when you look at the numbers at the top, they speak aloud that, women are notoriously underrepresented group, and the percentage of women at leadership position is very, very low. So first is that it is very important that leadership takes that accountability, and we have a gender balance at the roles, at the decision making roles there. The second is employee experience. We may hire a diverse number of candidates into the organization, but what is important is that, are we giving them the right culture? Are we giving them a conducive culture? Are we giving them a inclusive ecosystem, where they are comfortable, where they are at ease? And to do that, we have to do away with systematic biases that we have in the system. And therefore, it is very important that we have rigorous amount of sensitization, not just for the employees, but for the leadership, for the managers, to move from, unconscious bias to conscious inclusion. That is very important, especially in COVID times. We see that, as Dr. Rupender rightly mentioned, that while everybody got impacted, but our society is such, our conditioning is such that women are the primary caregivers for most of the families, and therefore they were hardly hit. They were hit majorly, right? And therefore it is very important, not just for women, but for every employee, to give them that flexibility, to give them that comfort during these uncertain times, right? To enable them with various, maybe upskilling programs, the flexibility to be able to work and integrate their work life. So that is also very, very important here. Another thing that I would like to mention here is one of the programs that we've been running for the last 2 years, and this is called Charisma, which is our parenting program for parents at IBM. And this has been while we've been running it for 2 years, but it has been a great support during the COVID times, because this was the time when employees had a lot of anxiety as parents, right? Not just anxiety in themselves, but anxiety in kids. How do you engage with them? There are online classes. I have to attend the meetings. What do I do? I think there were a lot of sensitization that we did across, making them comfortable, right? Releasing that anxiety, because we feel it is very important for every individual to be mentally and physically fit, right? So that somewhere became the focus. Also, as part of this parenting support, and for all the other organizations also, I would say that with maternity benefit being increased to 6 months, right? Now, 6 months is a very long gap when you are not in the workforce and you are on leave. And that is the time when a lot of women, while joining back, returning back from maternity leave, feel very uncomfortable, because they've been not in touch with their colleagues, with the organization for quite a long time, right? And therefore, it is our responsibility to be to connect with them, to understand if there is any upskilling required. What is the kind of support that they would need when they return back back to home. So what we do is we have a buddy assigned who is in constant touch with the new mothers who are still on maternity leave and are about to come back, to just talk very simple things that we had a team meeting, there was a birthday in our celebrated in our team, there is a leadership change here, we've got new assignments, new clients, just small things, so that they feel linked, they feel connected to the organization, and when there is a time for them to come back, they don't feel that gap as much, right? So that also helped us a lot, and we've been able to reduce attrition of our returning mothers by almost 22% in the last 2 years, which is a big percentage here. So this is where we have to create that employee experience, and not just create but also listen to them, right? And through engagement surveys, through inclusion surveys, you have to hear them out, you have to listen to them, you have to understand what is the feedback and what is better that we can do to be, for them to feel included all the time. And the third pillar is external eminence, right? Standing up for each other, right? Standing as an organization, standing up for the other organization, talking about the issues, bold issues that we have, having positive impact on the society. Being a technology company, it is very important that we build a pipeline of women into the workforce. And how do we do that is to encourage, inspire young girls to join STEM education, to take up science, technology, engineering, and medical, right? And that is how we have to build that pipeline that will come into the workforce. And the second way to build the pipeline is that we all know that women, tend to leave their career during their mid-age, right? Due to family responsibility, caretaking responsibility. And all the more because of COVID, a lot of working women have left their career. So as an organization, you have to extend that support so that they can come back to the workforce after their break, right? Give them that upskilling opportunity, let them join back, train them, give them that practical experience. And that is also very, very important. So I think, and the second part is, this is this whole is one part of it, where we are creating an equitable workplace, and equitable society for everyone. But the other part is that as a woman, right, you also have to step up for yourself, right? You have to step up, you have to ask for something that you're not getting. You have to raise your voices. That is also very, very important. And that would be my message to the audience out here. Stand up for yourself. If you're not getting something, talk about it. If you feel there is an unconscious bias out there, talk about it, and that is very important.
Thank you so much. It was great listening to you, Kanak. Thank you. And now may I invite Ms. Bhavna Batra to please give her viewpoints.
Thank you so much, Rupali. Absolute pleasure to be here. For those who know me, they know that I enjoy playing devil's advocate more than anything else. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bust a bunch of myths that I believe have existed for a little too long. Myth number 1. There is a glass ceiling that we can't break. By the way, 23% of C-suite members globally today are women leaders, right? And this number was much, much lower even 10 years ago. It's a myth that's been bust. Second myth, there are more favorable situations, more favorable policies, more favorable expectations for my male colleagues versus me. No. There is just what we choose to do about the situations that we are put into, how we choose to ask for help, how we choose to leverage the power of our ecosystem, how we choose to use a positive mindset versus a victim mindset. Good afternoon. My name is Bhavna. And over the last, many years, I've realized that I I get pleasure when I'm introduced as a leader, not as a woman leader. Because being a woman is who I am. It's very core to my identity. But being a leader is equally core to my identity. And I feel that being a woman brings in certain facets, but being a leader is about so much more, right? The whole conversation around gender diversity, right? To me, is symptomatic of a larger conversation. And that larger conversation is how do we drive meaningful inclusion in organizations? Now, that meaningful inclusion could be about how do we hear diverse voices? Those diverse voices could be diverse genders. And we are just talking about men and women. There's an equally becoming more and more prominent third gender that is being acknowledged the world over. It could be about different cultures. It could be about our colleagues who come from the LGBTQ communities, right? And it could be about all of these or more. When I really think about it, I think diversity, and this is an interesting definition that I read somewhere, diversity is the art of thinking independently together. And it's ironic in many ways. It is an oxymoron in many ways, thinking independently and thinking together. And I think, to me, as I have experienced different organizations, having spent time on the consulting side as well as the corporate HR side, there are 3 or 4 things that organizations who are slightly ahead in the curve on diversity tend to practice a little more consistently. Is one, are we listening, right? Who do we listen to? How do we listen? One thing is to say that, the role of every manager is to listen, but are we equipping our managers with the skills required to listen effectively and meaningfully, right? One of the things that I've often heard say is that women bring more emotional intelligence into the workplace. Yes and no. By the way, our men colleagues bring a reasonable amount of emotional intelligence themselves, right? And therefore, it is not just about relying on native intelligence, but looking at what are those skills that we need to upskill so that certain practices that we expect the organization to drive are consistently practiced, right? And that is where, when you have new manager assimilation programs, to what extent do you talk about the fact that, listen, 15 to 20% of your time, if you're leading a team, is about listening to your colleagues and is about creating a difference for them by helping them think through options, opportunities, etc. Yeah, that's one aspect. The second aspect is very often, when we talk about diversity, it gets boiled down to a set of metrics. What is the percentage of diverse candidates on your hiring slate? What is the percentage of women who were promoted as an overall percentage of promotees? I'm not saying it's not important to look at these metrics. It is, because we are still at the early stages of this journey. But I think the picture of success is, how do we tap into the skills that each one of us, the perspective and mindset that each one of us brings into the organization, so that we can set each person up for success? When we look at diversity in the organization, the reality is every person brings a very diverse lens. It could be in terms of skills. It could be in terms of, capabilities. It could be in terms of the things that bring out the best in us. And diversity basically needs to be viewed not as something that we have to enforce through metrics, not as something that we have to enforce through programs, which are only diversity oriented, but as part of the DNA. Professor Himanshi, when you had, originally shared the context of this particular conversation, there were a few things that you had put in your note, and I've got that open in front of me, and a couple of them really stood out to me. One was, how do you navigate the challenge in career advancement? Right. When I was with one of my previous organizations, I had the good privilege of coaching a couple of women colleagues, and each one of them came to me with this view that we have been at this level for a certain period of time, and we feel that we are stagnant. We are not given opportunities that help us grow. And together, we sort of unpacked that problem. We unpacked the issue. one of the important things is that when we move from one career stage to the next career stage, for example, from an individual contributor to a manager, or from a manager to a manager of managers, the expectations undergo a change. And for you to be able to cater to those expectations, there is a certain amount of discretionary effort and time that you need to invest. Now, given everything that surrounds you, it is for you to look at whether you have the time to make that investment or you don't have the time to make that investment. Let me give you an example. One of the myths that is there in the corporate world is that if for you to be seen to be successful, today, if you're an individual contributor, tomorrow you should be leading a team. Day after, you should be leading a larger team. The time after that, you should grow in a general manager work stream. Not essential, right? A lot of people who are successful are people who have figured out that as much as I may want to experiment with that, but some of my life realities right now don't give me the flexibility to do that. So rather than stretching myself thin in a million different directions and not feeling like I'm on top of my game in every one of them, how can we actually focus on the areas that we want to work on and make a difference there? So go for gold every single time. And I will say this to every single woman colleague on every forum. Don't settle. You don't need to compromise. What you do need to realize is, how do you go for gold every single time? And to do that, two things. One, ask for support. Ask for clarifications. If you don't get it, that's not a strike against you. Ask what needs to be done differently. Ask for help, and that help will get provided. The second thing is, and we, I think, appreciate it in our personal lives, but it's true in our professional lives. As women, we have an accountability to other women around us. We have an accountability to enable. We have an accountability to support. We have an accountability to be part of the ecosystem. It is very natural that if I see another woman in my peer group doing better than I am, or my perception of doing better than I am, that somewhere there is a bit of a comparison that comes in. Think of that comparison from a great side, from a positive side. What can you learn from her? What can she learn from you? How can you collaborate and create even greater opportunities for both? And that is something that we potentially don't do as much of, right? My picture of success is someday there will be no such forums. There will be no forums where we are talking about women being successful in the work environment, because listen, as professionals, we are all aware, and I've got some statistics here, which I'm guessing that if any one of us Googles, we will get all of these statistics. So a McKinsey report, for instance, which says that gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to outperform their peers. And ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to outperform their peers. A PwC report that speaks about the fact that 82% of business leaders whose organizations have a global footprint agree or strongly agree that employees demonstrate a commitment to inclusion, as compared to only 67% of local companies, right? 23% of C-suites today are made up of women. And actually, some of us may be aware, but there is something called a 30% club that was set up. It was first set up in the UK and now has gone global, where the intent is 30% of leadership team compositions and board compositions should be women leaders. And several leading organizations are a part of this club, right? At the end of the day, if I were to think about diversity and inclusion and, follow in Rupinder and Kanak's footsteps and leave 2 or 3 actionable insights for us to think about. One, we need to take ownership. What we graduated with, or did our MBA in, or our master's in, is not enough. We need to constantly learn. We need to constantly evolve to ensure that we remain at the cutting edge like all of our other colleagues, right? So that's one. The second one is help and ask for help. Become part of the support system, become part of the ecosystem, right? Whether it is a coach, whether it is a colleague, whether it is a peer, don't shy away from asking for help. I come from 3 generations of Army, Navy, and Air Force on both sides of my family, and therefore I grew up thinking strength is in not making mistakes. And the first team that I led, I was a 25-year-old. I had a team of 10 people, all of whom were significantly more senior than me. The difference being they were associates who didn't have an MBA, and I had an MBA. Right? The first 6 months that I had in my role as a team manager were perhaps the most turbulent of my professional career. Why? Because I felt I had to have all the answers. It didn't help that there were no women in that team, right? They were all gentlemen colleagues. And as I sort of, started working with them, there were many, many mistakes that I made. It came to a point where I thought that maybe I'm not cut out for this. I should be an individual contributor for the rest of my life. And I still remember I was working in Bombay those days. I was sitting by one of the bay windows one evening, 7:38 in the evening. And I was seriously contemplating what I needed to do when someone from the team came up to me and he offered me a vada pav. And he took that opportunity to just sit and he said, "Why are you looking so troubled?" And this gentleman, who today is a very dear friend, was one of my harshest critics. He would leave no meeting, no stone unturned to tell me exactly how wrong I am, right? And I spoke to him about the fact that I honestly felt a little out of depth. And he said just one thing to me: you don't have to have all the answers, but you do need to ask for help. So for all the ladies out there, ask for help. Ask for help and acknowledge that you have a learning curve and watch out for each other. Because honestly, it is by building a support system, it is by building an ecosystem that we will not just help others grow, but we will grow ourselves. Yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Rupali.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was really great. And learned a lot of new things from you, Bhavna. Great listening to you. And let's move on to Dr. Himanshi Tiwari. If you could give your viewpoints, ma'am.
Thank you, Rupali. Actually, it's both a comfort as well as a responsibility to speak after 2-3 experts have already spoken on the topic, and I would very gladly take that responsibility, because there are some points to start with. Before I start talking about my own research in this area for last 6-7 years, in fact, and Rupinder has told us about how can we, set the narratives, and how can gender stereotyping be, taken care of right from the beginning, right from home. And she being a military veteran and has seen the environment at her family, at her home. When it comes from right from the horse's mouth, we there is no second thought of not believing it, and it's goes without saying that all four of us have the same kind of experiences, being blessed with a family where there are working mothers, where there is an equality right at home. So then we moved to Kanakji, and she has put some very, very important and significant practices that IBM has introduced for the lady workers and the women workforce there. And the year when what she quoted is 1899, when there was the first women being employed there at IBM. So we can understand the kind of seriousness and the kind of commitment that as a company they have about bringing more women at workforce, and bringing it in a very natural way, taking it in a very basic DNA of the company. Then it's my pleasure, and it's good that Bhavna has played the role that she is generally known for, and has put the point forward for on both sides of the coin. And she talked about the things that we don't need we don't need super women's. We need women who are not following any who are not trying to fit in any watertight compartment images, asking for help and saying no for not knowing things, and accepting the faults and coming up and preparing for whatever is expected for. I would start my viewpoints from something that is backed from my own research and also from the secondary research available to us. See, women careers should be seen from various perspectives, and there is a point when there is a kind of gender stereotyping which starts right at the age of choosing the career. Okay, and this I'm talking on behalf of lots of in-depth interviews that I have taken from of my own students and of those ladies who are in the mid careers of their mid age of their careers. That there was a kind of subtle gender stereotyping in the family, and it was very peculiar to some certain points. That I'll quote an example that one of the lady in one of my interviews said that I was the second child of my family, of my parents, that lady was saying, and there were all engineers in the family. We were two daughters, and my I was not interested in engineering, but my elder sister somehow got selected into medicals, and she became started practicing, started reading, getting trained for being a medical doctor, and I was left there. And my grandfather and father had asked me to take physics, chemistry, maths as my 10+2, because nothing else but engineering was my career that they have decided for me. Because the statement that she said is still echoes in my ears when she said that my father and grandfather said that it's a family of engineers. We don't have any boy, and your elder sister has taken medicine, so it's you who will take the baton forward, and now you will do engineering, because had there been a boy, he would have done engineering for us. And then she said, okay, when I started gradually liking engineering as a subject and I wanted to pursue civil engineering, then again a peculiar bias came that how can you go for civil engineering, go for an engineering stream where you can sit in an air conditioned office, because girls don't go and work at roadside and in sun. So that was a unique bias that actually exists, that you have to choose engineering because we are a family of engineers. You cannot choose civil engineering because girls don't go and work in open sun. So sit in air conditioned office, go for computer or computer science or software engineering. So there is a bias at the entry point. Then there are some leaky pipelines at the time when girl joins, and then she's into her family way. And right, what Kanak has already pointed out, that there are parenting supports that IBM and many companies are now providing for returnee mothers, because this is the most leaky stage. Pipeline is most leaky at this stage when girl enter into a stage of being a mother, and there is a unsaid, unwritten, unshared guilt that is there when she goes out for work, leaving the child at home. And there is a lot of cultural social issues revolved, because as I said in my note also, that work has same meaning for men and women in our country and also in all over the world, but parenthood doesn't have the same meaning for men and women. Motherhood and fatherhood doesn't have same meaning, not only in India but also across the world. The kind of partners that we have in Rainbow Projects, the same kind of sentiments echo in European countries, in Nordic countries especially, that when a girl enters into the family way, the responsibility of taking care of the child and other caregiving activities is expected from her. The second is the leaky pipeline at that point of time. And then, like what Bhavna also has pointed out, how do you navigate your way to success, to career advancements? That's again the third stage where there is a area which we can contribute, or ladies themselves can ask for help, or organizations can provide such help. So I would say that this particular topic which we are currently pondering upon, how women at work, current stages, current status and way forward, this particular concern is not only that can be understood in terms of statistics. because statistics is available worldwide to all of us. There is a data which talks about women at work, which talks about their participation, which talks about how many what kind of attrition is there at what particular stage or in their career, what the companies are doing to retain mothers, to retain female workforce. There is a data available which we all can see, and with just by a click of mouse, and we can find out that after maternity benefit act was amended, what is the status, and what is there a decline in the recruitment of females? Yes, there is, because maternity benefit amendment acts require for a certain kind of infrastructure that a company needs to provide to its would be mothers, and and that becomes one of the reasons that there is a decline, that they're not hiring that much ladies at their productive ages that they were hiring before, because they don't want to go for that commitment and compliance that government asks for. So I think we need to understand this particular point of view, this particular concern of women workforce from societal, psychological, and cultural point of view as well. And gender role differentiation is one. Another is that diversity and equity and diversity and inclusion is not also something about numbers. It's about the culture that exists there. Means having this number of students at a particular institute or this much number of females in a particular office doesn't solve any problem or doesn't answer any question. It's just a number that we can quote and boast about. What kind of a inclusion and what kind of a equity we provide to our female students, to our female colleagues, and what kind of advancement opportunities do we provide to them? Do we expect women to be men to be leaders? Definitely not. Definitely not. But when we are seeing the kind of leadership traits that are successfully being accepted, there are certain compromises, right? For you can say in terms of time, in terms of work-life balance, in terms of other responsibilities that is expected from both the genders, right? Both for males and for females. And one more thing which is very important, and we are most of the organizations, except few organizations like IBM and Accenture, most of the organizations are missing this point, that we are not talking about postpartum depression, which is a very, very common cause of females leaving the workplace, workforce after child's birth. And this postpartum depression that happens when a woman gives birth to a child and she is psychologically not in that much fit and stable state, that's the point or in her life, in her career, where both families and organizations have maximum responsibility towards that lady. So IBM is doing a wonderful job, I must say, and the IBM can act upon as the success story should be told to other organizations to take this point forward. One thing more that I want to point out about on the basis of my personal research here is that there are three kinds of target groups which we should focus. One is the ladies who are destined enough to have professional education and they are trained enough to get to get jobs and entry into corporate world and workforce. Second target group is those ladies who have joined the workforce but have left it somewhere because of several reasons, and the reasons could be numerous. There could be personal reasons, there could be structural reasons also. There could be reasons available. There could be some facts that are in her control and some are not in her control. So we can talk about that further. And the third target group is of those ladies who are not destined enough to have that kind of education which can give them the kind of career that they look for. They had left their education for some way or the other, for some reason or the other. Their education could not be completed to that extent that they can get enough opportunities to start their career. So what kind of support we as a society can offer them? And here I would say that I would like to bring forward that we need to now focus our discussion on these particular topics, that are we having that structural opportunity available to all three target groups that I just talked about. And once they are into the system, what kind of support as a law, as culture, as environment we are giving them, so that their stay there is happy stay. Equity and inclusion is there. Diversity definitely is a easy thing to achieve, but once they are into the system, how happy and how balanced and how equitable environment are we giving to them is again a point for our concern. And are our men ready for that? Like what Bhavna said, that we have experiences of working in teams where where there are people who have been the biggest enabler for our successes. In my personal life, I would say that the two men in my life, my father and my husband, are the biggest enablers for my whatever I have been able to do. And so there are people who are enablers. There are people who are acting as support systems. So we are not talking about a place where we are putting any gender into superiority, but moving away from the harsh statistics again is not something that we would go for. And the laws and regulations that are available in our country per se, to bring this particular world where, right, what Bhavna said, that we would not be requiring such forums where we will be talking about women equality and women participation. So with this thought, I think I would request again Rupali to take some of the questions which are there, because actually it's 4:30, and Bhavna has requested me that she has to leave at 4:30 for some other commitment. So just let me see if she is still there. Okay, I think we could not give a see off to her, and she has to rush for another commitment. So Bhavna is already signed off, and in her absence, I would say that it was pleasure having her in the panel, and we can give offline, we can give our thanks to her, and we will continue with the discussion. So over to you, Rupali, for question answers and the other open Q&A round.
Sure. Thank you so much, Himanshi ma'am. And like I said, this was a very powerful discussion that we heard today from our esteemed panelists. And I can see that coming in through the questions that I see in the chat box. There are quite a few questions, but then looking at the time, I'll see how many I can take. So I'll start one by one. Uh, I see the first one coming from a student, Sharath R. He's asking from the panel, how can we empower our women when even the little they have is taken from them by their husbands, prevalent in the rural areas? So it's open to the panel and anyone can answer.
I think if given an opportunity, I would request Rupinder to kindly answer this, and if Kanak wants to add on something.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think a very valid question. And I see it happening day in and day out, with our own household helps. If you see, that's the stark reality of their lives. They keep earning throughout the day, and whatever they earn, the husband, not all the time, but a lot of times, really splurges away in whatever, things that he has to do. Now, there is no easy answer to this question. Let me acknowledge that, first of all. I can't say, like, for example, in an organization, I can, it may not be easy to implement, but I can say these are the three things that we should do, and these are the best practices. Because the clientele that you're dealing with them is educated, is to a certain degree empowered, and also can act. But in this situation, I think the only answer that I can think of at this point in time is education, literacy. And, when I say literacy and education, not only for women, but maybe also for men. If we can really strengthen the grassroots of rural India through education and information and constant focus on having this dialogue, maybe a time will come when, we can move from level 0 to level 2. But yeah, it's a long journey to take.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Kanak, would you want to add anything?
No, I think Dr. Rupender has covered it completely. And as she rightly said, there is no right answer for it, because the kind of gentry that we are talking about is very different. And education is the one that will definitely help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I move on to the next question that I can see here from another student, Soumya Mukherjee. Can quotas and gender diversity language enhance the status quo in corporate governance?
Okay, I can take that question.
Yes.
Thank you.
See, in my view, quota doesn't help, right? Everything that you get, irrespective of gender, is based on merit. What we are trying to do through inclusion equity is enable creating that equitable workforce for people who need more support, who need more extended hand, enabling them with programs. For example, a lot of times, if I talk about gender diversity, and I think Rupender also pointed out in her initial talk that we have these self-limiting beliefs. Maybe I have to be perfect all the time, or I have to manage everything with a perfection. This never happens. Perfection never comes. So I think sensitizing them more to be able to overcome those self-limiting beliefs, for them, for women to be able to manage work life, and not just women, even I would say all genders for that matter. Because when we say, according to me, there is nothing called work-life balance, okay? Because there's never this straight line out there. It's always an integration where, at one given point, you'll have to give more focus to your career and somewhere delegate responsibility at home, and then, focus more on at your home, and then delegate something at work. So it is always an integration, and that is what is required. So we have to enable the workforce. We have to sensitize our workforce. Ask them to identify their biases that are there in the system and overcome those biases. Right? That is important. Creating that culture is important. Enablement programs are important. Having gender neutral policies are important. Right? And obviously, with all of these, when you have an environment where everyone can thrive, people will move up automatically on the ladder. Quota is not needed. That is my view.
Thank you so much. Thank you for answering that, Kanak. Well, I take up the third question, which is from Juhi Srivastav. She's again our student. Why are we still struggling to find a balance in the number of men and women employees working in any organization?
Anshik, can I take that? That's an interesting one.
Definitely.
Okay, so and I'll take a thank you, Juhi, for asking that question. You should actually read history to answer that question. If you go back many centuries back and look at some of the way, especially the Indian culture was crafted, women were actually raised at a better pedestal than men, if not equal. I come from Sikhism, and many years back, Guru Nanak said, "So kyo manda aakhiye jin jamme rajan." Why call that lady bad who gives birth to kings, right? And similarly, Hindu scriptures also have given a lot of importance and reverence to women. If you go back and read history a lot more, you will find that as per our scriptures, women were actually treated better and given, whether it's property, whether it's decision making, a lot of it were given, if not more, definitely equal rights. But I think the history gets a little confusing when despite having equal rights, there were the policies of sati as per social norms. Yeah, so it's like like a balancing wheel wherein on one side we are saying there are great things, and the other side we are saying there are discriminatory ways, discriminatory religious beliefs and all of that. And of course, it took a big toll when the Muslim invaders came to India, and the story completely changed, where they used women as a source of power and source of oppression. Now, if you go to US for that matter, in the US also, the equal rights to voting were given just about 100 years back, probably not even 100. And we're talking about Western societies, which are far ahead of Eastern societies. So I think the issue is deeper again here. The equality that we are talking about, when you say struggle to find a balance in the number of men and women, there are multiple narratives for it. One is the whole historical and cultural and ecosystem piece of it. The second is more deeper. If you look at the power equation, so men and women really look at power in a very different way. And which is why, which is why the other gender is not really encouraged in the organizations, because then it becomes an inequitable distribution of power. I'm just leaving you with a thought there. You can research, Google, and come back to me with questions later. But those are the two reasons. And the third is definitely the social narratives. Even in educated families today, despite our men being very, very supportive, and I completely agree with Himanshi when she says that the two role models, her father and her husband, have played a huge role. I say that immensely. But can I tell you the truth? Even today, 60% of the house is being looked after by me, and 40% is being contributed my husband. And I always go out on forums and say he's the biggest supporter that I have. So I'm not denying it, and I'm living maybe a hypocrisy right in front of you. But those are the norms, I think, that we kind of need to challenge and say these are the reasons that we need to, really take care of, and before we get a balance in the men and women numbers and organizations. I'm sorry if I overstepped, but I thought I'll just bring it on.
No, actually, this is such an interesting thing, Rupinder, that you have put forward and given me an opportunity to speak just one thing about it, that there was a point of time when someone in my family only said that. So, I mean, not about my father, because the father is actually the father figure, but you can question husband anytime. So somebody in the family asked that, so what a big deal? I mean, if he is supporting you, what a big deal in that? I said, no, that's not a big deal that he's supporting anything in the family. Now, it's about equality that exists there in the mind of a particular person, that it's not a kind of allowing someone to work. It's a very natural thing for few men that both the genders are working and both the genders are contributing in the household things. So that natural thing should exist in the DNA of men of the family and men at the workplace, that it's a natural course for a women to come and work, and for a men to come and work and also contribute in the kitchen, and a women to work in the kitchen as well as at offices. So that is the most utopian day that we all are struggling to achieve. Okay, over to you, Rupali.
That was good one. Thank you so much to both the panelists. Okay, here we have Shuchi Jain. She is the Corporate Diversity Officer at TCS. And she has put up a question to the panelists. How can we as organizations, I'm sorry, just a second. How can we as organizations support women to a stage further, the stage of self-actualization? Would like to thank the panel. I would like the panelist view on this. Thank you. So over to you, the panelists.
Rupali, can you just come again? My connection got, yeah.
How can we as organizations support women to a stage further, the stage of self-actualization? Would like the panelist view on this.
Before I contribute, I would request Kanak first to say about it, because IBM is doing something which is ahead of other organizations. And then Rupinder can talk about being a person from military and seeing the things right there in front of her. And then I'll be the last one to contribute. Over to you, Kanak.
Sure. Thank you. So I would say that as an organization, we have the responsibility to provide, as I already said, to have an equitable workforce, sensitize our women employees on various self-limiting beliefs that they have, enable them with the tools and the skills that are required to grow up the ladder, right? That enablement is very important, right? For example, at mid-level, a lot of women, even in IBM, we did a survey and we realized that a lot of women are not ready to take up managerial roles because probably there is a feel that if I take up managerial roles, I'm handling a team, I may not be able to give time at home. How will I handle conflict out there? So I think it's very important to enable them with the tools, with required training on negotiation, on handling conflicts, on various required skills that they need to grow up the ladder. That is very important to provide. And the second thing is, of course, allyship. Male allyship is very important. So we are not having a war here, right? Male, one gender versus the other gender. It's everybody moving together and creating that culture. Supporting each other, leveraging the positivities, leveraging the skills of every person that we have. So I think as an organization, we need to provide those tools and required support to our employees to be able to move to the next level.
Okay. Rupinder, after you.
Yeah, I think from an organizational perspective, Kanak has said it all. I don't think I have something to add from a systemic point of view, but I do want to spend 2 minutes on really, understanding from what Shuchi meant and maybe giving my perspective of what does self-actualization really mean. Self-actualization, as we all know, is the topmost need of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Right.
Wherein that represents all that you can, that when all your basic needs are met, you can reach the pinnacle of satisfying your creative potential best, right? So who are these self-actualized people? Let me give you 2-3 perspectives from my experience and understanding. People who are self-actualized actually have radical self-acceptance, I would say. They accept who they are and not the version of what society accepts from them, and which is more so in the case of a woman than a man, right? So I'm bringing that narrative right in here because that's reared in us from childhood. A boy should not cry, a girl should not speak loud, and so on and so forth. So are you really able to accept yourself the way you are, yet keeping a democratic worldview? The second clear characteristic from a self-actualized person would be that they are realistic in their approach. While I know what I can do and I know what I have the potential to, there's also reality that exists outside, right? All of us today are sitting here talking about inclusion and equity, while we all know it's still about 50, 60 years away, isn't it? To really get there. But the fact is that we'll still continue with our passion, keeping a realistic view of what is and what can be. But we cannot leave that dialogue. That's important. And I think last, which is most important, is that self-actualized people take one thing at a time and they take their life as a journey and not as an outcome. So I'm not happy at this point in time because I haven't got this. My parents do not support me for this. My work culture doesn't support me for this. It's a journey, right? The fact that you are here in this forum, talking to people, asking questions, giving your point of view, having a point of view, is in itself is a huge, achievement. So I think from that perspective, I should look at, and I kind of echo Bhavna's point of view here, while organizations will put systems and processes and tenets in place because they don't have a choice. It's an economic imperative for them. But for us to really reach that level of self-actualization, it has to start from radical self-awareness and what is possible and what is not. Over to you, Himanshu.
Thank you. Actually, yes. What I could understand from what both of you have said and what the person is trying to question is, we are actually, I think, very close to what the person maybe, or we believe that we are close to what the person is trying to get the answer from us. If I take it in this context, what both of you have said is, how can organizations help a lady to be a more self-actualized being? And if you allow me to give an example of the kind of female scientists that we are currently having, and there was a picture which was quite hyped about that, in a typical sari clad, bindi and gajra clad women, working for NASA projects. And so this is, I think maybe we are expecting a place where self actualization is more allowed, is letting a lady what she is without any tags putting on her, without asking her to fit into a particular predefined way of behavior, or predefined way of dressing up or speaking up. That what Rupinder also said, that girls should not speak loud and boys should not cry in front of anyone. So I think organizations can give this particular opportunity to people to be self-actualized, both men and women, just by giving an open, transparent, trusting environment where you can be what you are without the fear of being judged by anyone. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Okay, so we move on, and I see some more questions coming from our students. So Ishita Diwan is asking, why are women not offered higher positions in the name of lack of time that they offer to the organization?
Rupali,
Yeah,
I think during our discussions we
I
have
think it's
already
already
covered.
answered.
Yeah,
Correct, correct.
we
That's
have
what I was
already covered
wondering,
it.
that it's already been taken up.
And I would
So,
request you to kindly take the question and the compliment and the comment from Rajendra Khimsera ji, who is our, we are blessed to have him here as one
yes.
of the attendee, and he is giving us some
I
information.
just saw
Yeah,
that question. It
yeah,
has just come up.
yeah.
So he asked just an information.
Hmm.
According to the Global Gender Gap Report 2021, it will take another 100 years to achieve gender equality based on the current rate of progress.
Yeah, we agree to you, sir. And actually, we started with this very point, and the kind of data that you're providing is actually something that we started our whole discussion with. And this is actually the point of concern why we all are sitting here and discussing about it. And we have examples like IBM, what Kanak is representing, an organization, and the kind of work experience we have. Dr. Rupinder has from a military background to now. I see how seriously she is now involved into her academic research. So being a medical doctor, that too in military, and now coming back to academic research, giving her 100%. And if such people are there, I think Kim Seraji, I think we though it's 100 years, the journey is long, but the results, we can see the horizon right from here. But yes, it's a long way to reach there. You can take one question from Manoj Patel ji, Rupali,
Yes, I will put up that question as well. Just a second.
because it's about how women can be a bit more entrepreneurial in nature, and how startups can.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So Manoj Patel ji is the founder of FXM Track Financials, and he's asking, how can we uplift our women, especially for student women and co-founder in startup, where we have seen women founder coming to Series A funding and above.
I think Kanak ji, would you like to contribute first?
Okay, um, I would say that one is that if you see during COVID, right, it has the whole digital transformation. I think has supported um, all, especially women a lot. Uh, when I would not know, I would not have more of an information on the funding part. But on an entrepreneurship level, you see that a lot of COVID, while has posed a lot of challenges all across, but they're the positive. angle to it is that a lot is going digital, right? We've seen a lot of women who have started their own entrepreneurship. They are getting into classes for yoga, whatever interests them, whatever makes them happy, everything is going online. So I think that online platform has provided a lot of opportunity for everyone to start their own ventures in the field that they enjoy the most. But of course, on the other aspect that has been asked, I'm sorry, I would not have knowledge on that.
I think I would like to contribute on that, and then I would request Rupinder to please conclude it. See, if we go by a typical academic way of understanding entrepreneurship, it requires a certain kind of a mindset, and where moving ahead, taking risk, and not going by the status quo, and not believing someone else rather than believing yourself most, is something which is required right from the beginning. When you just think of some startup rather than going for a cozy, comfortable job, when you think of putting things at stake and taking the risk and starting something of your own, so that enterprising mindset actually is there since very beginning. So half of the battle is already won. And the kind of problems that a person who is going to start up, who is going to be the founder or the co-founder of a startup, I would say that's the most general neutral thing. The same kind of challenges a male faces, the same a female faces, right? For finances, for venture capitalist, or the market opportunities, or selling yourself with limited resources, selling your thought and idea with limited resources. And in terms of entrepreneurial journey, to begin with, I would say females are contributing more as entrepreneurs rather than entering into hardcore 9 to 5 job, because there the kind of requirements is different, and there is a data to support that, because they are allowed to be in the vicinity of their household and allowed to manage their other responsibilities. If I take an example of Seva Foundation, which started long back and has gone a long way now, it all started with the same concept that you don't need to step out all the time from your house, because that's not possible for you for certain reasons. So you can stay there and be someone who is contributing in Seva or such kind of cooperatives. And digitalization and moving on a digital platform is helping those women entrepreneurs or people who are trying to start up something in this particular scenario, where things are even more challenging than and there are challenges, there are opportunities out of them. Rupinder, would you like to conclude on this?
So I think, like Kanak, I don't have information from a solution perspective because I haven't ventured into that space. But I do have, a point of view, which is, I think, largely stemming from the same thing. When we say what are the barriers to entry, the women entrepreneurial space, or women not being given funding, are by and large the same as women not making to the senior leadership positions in corporates, right? These are those inherent biases. That one of them is, of course, those inherent biases, which is that, because most of the men who are investors, most of the investors are men, right? At the end of the day, there are very few women who are venturing into the venture capital space, if I may call it. So, that becomes a bias in itself. So maybe one solution really could be that how can we get more women sitting on the investing side of the table.
All right.
So that could be one way. The second way could be, and the reason could be actually, and that holds true actually for corporate space also. In a lot of my leadership studies, and this is based on a lot of assessment centers and development centers that we've done with high potential leaders. Women are judged on performance, and men are evaluated on potential.
True.
Right? Himanshi is nodding, so I'm sure she's in agreement with me.
More than that, I fully agree.
Yeah. And which is why, I think I heard somebody, was it so there's a website, very successful startup called She Heroes.
Yeah.
I think the CEO of that enterprise is a woman. And she actually says the same thing. She says that, when it comes to ideas which are spearheaded by women, they are judged to a very, very difficult, rigorous standard. and also assume that they will probably drop off or they'll not be able to pull it off because of the surrounding ecosystem constraints, and which is why they're not really funded. I think to my answer to that question would be that let's get more women on the investing side of the table.
Yeah, yeah, that's the solution actually. That the more power to them, the more of similar species will be there.
Absolutely. Himanshi ma'am, I think it's almost time. So should we stop the question answers?
I think we should stop the Q&A session, and we have, I would like to share with my panelists and everybody who is attending that one of our attendee who is a big support to BIMTech as an, for Institute, Rajendra Kimsera ji, who is giving us an information about that that he's a part of an initiative, the Federation of Thai Industries, where he's saying that they have joined the implementation of projects strengthening the Thai economy through the power of Thai women, or through the power, short women empower Asia Thailand kind of a platform that he wanted to be all of us to be informed about. And thank you, sir, for this information. And I think, Rupali, this is a time when we can give a formal vote of thanks, though I'm short of words for the kind of support and time that my panelists have given to me, and in the kind of when you put your heart into something, when it's not something that you're doing just for the sake of. All my panelists, three of them have we were in regular touch through mails, through phone calls since last few days, and I could see and I could note and I could understand the passion that was there, and the kind of zeal that they were showing for being able to contribute to this cause, that I am short of words to say thank you actually. And thank you will be a smaller thing, and it's a long journey we are going to be a part for in this journey of Rainbow Center together. And I would keep asking them and troubling them for some of the initiatives of Rainbow Center and for career counseling and guidance that we and at BIMTech are trying to provide to our three target groups that I have mentioned. And thank you so much, Kanakji and Rupinder, and also Bhavna in her absentia, for agreeing to be a part of this panel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks from all of us here at BIMTech. It was pleasure listening to all of you today. And since we are live on Facebook, so we have a larger audience. And I'm sure everybody has been really benefited out of these discussions that have taken place. And like Himanshi ma'am said, this is not the end. There's lots that we need to do together. And along with Himanshi ma'am, I'm sure I'll also be troubling you for certain things with regards to the Rainbow Center. So thank you once again from us at BIMTech. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again for giving us this platform. It was lovely interacting with all the audience, Himanshi, Rupali, and of course, Kanak. There's so much to learn from your experience at IBM. So I think this is an evening spent well. So thanks a ton.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.